Morning, everyone. How's it going? While we wait for people to join, you can put your name in the chat box for attendance. And then think about if you have any questions about the final, the reflection, because I'm going to answer some of those. Okay. I hope y'all are doing well. We still have some people kind of coming into the Zoom. El Zoom. Is it El Zoom or La Zoom? I don't know. Did you guys have any questions about the final reflection? I know it's early in the morning and we're waking up, but let me know because Gabe is running 5 minutes behind, so I can answer any questions you have about what's left this semester, about the reflection. Or maybe you're just chilling and you're doing fine and you're excited. It's the last 2 weeks of school. I decided to make myself like a mocha this morning with some cold brew I have, and it just looks like straight chocolate milk. I started volunteer, I helped start and I volunteer at this food distribution on Thursdays, and they had cold brew that they gave us to distribute. So we took one because we also take like a little bag for ourselves, you know, as organizers. And yeah, the cold brew is like really strong. So I just mix it with milk so I don't get too like, you know, crazy, because caffeine does affect me a lot. Yes, hi everyone. If you want to unmute and say hi, I hope y'all are doing well. Cool.
Hello, good morning.
Hey, good morning.
I just wanted to unmute really quick because my dog is barking, so I just don't want to bother everyone, but I do want to say good morning.
Sure, cool, thanks. Good morning. All right. I hope everyone's not stressing out too much. Most of my coworkers have said they're going really easy on grades. I don't know if that helps y'all at all, but I think like you should feel good about that. Now, I don't know about other departments. I also know that there are some teachers who are still like pretty strict with grades and all of that. So, but in our department, we are leaning more on the, you know, positive side of grading. at least for myself, I'm going to try really, really hard not to give any Fs, especially for folks who have like been coming in regularly and all that stuff. So no Fs, no Ds. I don't even want to give Cs really. So I'm feeling happy about that. Yeah, for the, I don't mean to talk crap about other teachers at all, but I don't quite understand how you can be so hard on students right now. But teaching online kind of, there is a new feeling of control. So maybe they're feeling like they have all of that control, like deadlines and like, I don't know. I'm not sure, but just breathe through it. It's kind of like one of those situations. Okay, let me know if y'all have any questions about our reflection. No, Melanie. Oh, heck no. I'm sorry that happened to you, dude. That's terrible. I haven't told anyone to drop. If someone's brave enough to stay in the class and like try, like I'm not gonna fail you. But yeah, I think like it's kind of like taking control. I don't know. I feel like some teachers might feel like they have to control their situation, right? Because we're still working and at home and we're bored too, potentially. So anyways, okay. Thank you, Beta Diana, no problem. All right, I do have a couple like announcements, but if you do have questions about the reflection, put them in the chat box and make sure to put your name in the chat box for attendance. Okay, so my first announcement is that we're having our MECHA meeting today at 4 o'clock. And it's going to be an exciting one because we are talking about next semester. So for folks who are going to be here next semester and want to, be involved in a club, it's a really good time to do that, to come see us. And we're also going to be talking about undocumented students at our school and better ways to help them, because there is a discrepancy with the CARES Act. Actually, I think it was in this class, y'all kind of brought that to my attention. With the CARES Act, undocumented students can't get that $500 grant. And then with the emergency relief money, it's only $150 and it's a lottery system. So I've been talking to administration about like, well, how can we make up that extra $350? Because cash is really important right now, especially for undocumented students and mixed households and all of that, right? So today we're talking about that in our MECHA meeting. So it's at 4 o'clock. I'm going to copy paste the link in the chat box if you want to join. You can just come and listen or whatever, but it's a good way to like kind of get involved. It's especially good for transferring to colleges if y'all have your sights set on that next semester or whatever, next year. Another thing is, hold on, I'm gonna let Gabe in before I tell you the next thing. Real quick. The next announcement is that since we have had these meetings to talk about, how are undocumented students being helped at our school, I have had some admin kind of step up and provide some like info sessions for undocumented students, because the fear is that we're not like capturing all of their attention. Like there's 225 undocumented students in the Borderless Scholars Program, but I'm pretty sure there's more than 225 undocumented people at our school. So it's good to just kind of reach out to all students to learn more about like what's available, because while they might not be able to like give cash out in the form of a grant, they do have like vouchers for food and gas and computers, things like that. So anyways, I'm going to post that in the chat box as well. There's the date and then the Zoom ID. So it doesn't have a link, it has an ID. And that's just an info session for learning about services available at Mesa for undocumented students. Okay, cool. Hi, Gabe. Good morning. Buenos dias. Thank you for joining us. I was just announcing a couple things. Thank you for your patience. Cool. All right. So I think that's all that I have for y'all. So unless you have any more questions, I think we can just dive in. Um, let me know if you guys have any questions, especially about money for, if you're undocumented or you have a mixed status family, because I've been trying to learn more about what's out there for you. And Gabe's here, who could probably tell us about that as well. So, okay, I'm letting a couple more people in. Okay. Gabriel, can you hear us? You can hear us? Okay, cool. Okay, so let's just do a short introduction and then we'll just kind of dive into answering some of your questions. So I was given Gabriel's information through a friend whose name is RC. She's also an immigration lawyer, or immigration attorney, and I met her through it was called the Coalition to Close the Concentration Camps. And she was our resident lawyer because we were planning things that were potentially unlawful. And so she answered questions like, can we write stuff on the sidewalk with chalk and not get arrested? And so I trusted any recommendation that she had, especially because immigration attorneys do often double as activists, and they are often voices for our community. They don't just show up in courtrooms. So I thought that it would be great to meet him, and it's really nice to meet you finally, virtually. So maybe if you could jump in and just tell us a little bit about like some of the things you're involved in. You don't have to go too much in depth if you don't want to, but just kind of what you got going on right now. I think you're muted though, so you might want to, yeah.
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel Urias. Yeah, I'm an immigration attorney. I've been practicing now for some time. Yeah, I'll just be a rundown of a few things that I've done and some of the organizations that I'm a part of. I currently sit on the board of directors of San Diego La Raza Lawyers. I know RC should sit on the board as well. San Diego La Raza Lawyers is the foremost Latino bar organization here in San Diego, all throughout San Diego County. We oversee and implement, different activist procedures or questions to try to advocate for our Latino lawyers. And you don't have to be Latino, anyone who is down for the cause more or less can be part of the organization as well. I also am one of the board of directors for San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium. We oversee 40 to 50 nonprofits and faith-based organizations that have anything to do with immigrant rights, human rights in particular, especially now during the COVID-19. They're one of the most vulnerable populations that they've always been. So we try to gather resources and things like that. We help with bonds if they're in detention, and currently we have the project helping the Immigrant Relief Fund, who we're helping families who otherwise aren't eligible for anything else, obtain some kind of relief and help for the families and some money. And recently, we even got a big grant from the governor regarding that through Jewish Family Services. A little background of me, I have my own solo practice. I'm here at my home right now. But before that, mostly private practice, but I did 2 years for the ACLU. I was a staff attorney for them. I worked on a class action lawsuit against the Department of Justice, ICE, DHS, and CBP when they were unlawfully removing people from the United States. Between the years of 2015 2016, I was able to bring back about 110 people who were unlawfully removed from the United States due to the class action. It's called the Lopez-Venegas Settlement Agreement. But since then, I've been practicing immigration law. I'm born and raised from a small town, Shafter, California, which is, if you don't know it, that's fine. Sometimes if you blink up the 99 or the 5 driving towards San Francisco, you will miss it. There's around 10,000 people there where I grew up.
What's it called?
Shafter, Shafter. Right next to Bakersfield. That's why I always just tell people Bakersfield.
Oh, okay.
Because because they'll have no idea where I'm from. And then from there, I went undergrad in the Bay Area in Berkeley and back down here. Some school studies here at San Diego State as well, and then I got my Juris Doctorate here at California Western School of Law.
Wow, what a journey, huh?
Mm-hmm.
When you're
Small town boy.
when you reflect on it, it's like, wow. That's amazing. Thank you. So you've been involved in like bigger cases and smaller cases, like as you've gone on. And we had a lot of questions about what you're inspired by, like kind of why you chose this path. So I think like we might jump into like what it's like to be from such a small town and like what inspired you, because I feel like that's a common sentiment where there's like a catalyst, for people to kind of use to jump into such a important and stressful career as well, because I know you're working all the time, and especially right now you have to care for a lot of families and have a lot of empathy, and so yeah, I would love to like get into that as well. What is the most like demanding part of your day right now, would you say?
Well, and I mean, due to the virus, I mean, getting used to doing everything 100% remotely. I mean, I'm trying to do things more novel nowadays anyway. It's not their classic brick and mortar type of law firm, because I think a lot of stuff is going that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a few satellite offices I use around town. So I'm used to still being remote, but like everyone else, yourself as well, I can imagine being your home is now your 100% home and office at the same time can be a little taxing. But when it has to do with immigration, it's that in itself. Having to deal with a lot of clients remotely. I mean, some clients have to have a lot of faith, because I will sign a contract and they haven't even seen my face. They'll just get a word of mouth. I'll talk to them over the phone. A lot of them don't have the skills or technology to be able to do what we're doing nowadays. So it's creating a huge problem. Probably the biggest problem right now that I have is that I have several cases that are the MVP program, which is, I mean, just for our purposes, it's the Trump's stay in Mexico program, although they're not Mexican, right? While they're asylum seekers, and for better or worse, their cases keep getting pushed back because he keeps shutting down the border over and over again. And the courts here, which is this whole another class we can go into of what they do and how they do procedurally, but let's just say that I will find out from one day to the next that my hearing is canceled or moved or postponed, unbeknownst to me or my client, obviously, because they're in Mexico, although they're from Honduras or Guatemala or El Salvador. I'm the point person for them, so I have to relay that I'm sorry, your hearing is not for another month again, which is the same case when I have a. So I just perspectively, and that's kind of daunting on me and bringing on my client 100%, because I feel for their pain. For example, I had a hearing supposed to be the end of February that got pushed to early April. As you can imagine, that did not happen. That's supposed to happen June 1st. And now the government is saying that anything through June 15th has been, for MPP individuals, has been postponed. And they're being lazy enough to not even write a new notice to them. They're just saying, hey, just add a month to the date that your old notice says and come on over. Which is in itself a problem, because they don't speak English, and notices are all in English as well. So there's just there's a lot of frustrating things that are going on nowadays. But I mean, dealing with the government on a daily basis is probably the most frustrating thing.
And everything that's changing. I mean, I was reading about the man that passed away, unfortunately, at the Mesa Verde Detention Center on Sunday, and I also was learning about his case and how now they've started deporting Mexican detainees to Mexico City instead of Tijuana, right?
Yeah.
And in an effort to like, because I was researching, what is ICE doing to protect the detainees, because that's what they've said that they are going to do or they need to do, but they haven't, and the only effort is to deport migrants to Mexico City, which is further away from the border towns. And
So on that's an interesting note, because it's a little known fact, but they've been doing that since they've been able to. So for example, a classic example would be, and this is from my times in the ACLU, when we'd find out where people were removed. We'll have someone who was from, I don't know, Sonora or San Luis Potosí. but tactically speaking, the United States government would purposely send them to a state they're not from, they have no family from, to try to quote unquote deter them from coming back to the United States. But in reality, what they're doing them, they're putting them in harm's way, right? It'd be akin to sending me to some state that I have no idea about, drop me in the middle with no food, no money. What's going to happen to me? So that's something that they do. They have various devious tactics and coercive ways of the treatment of immigrants. So,
Yeah.
and the Mesa Verde one touches home because I was there a couple of weeks ago visiting the client. I had to go in full PPE gear, right? Gloves, the goggles, the masks, and thankfully my client is now home. They're in my hometown in Shafter. Actually, his family grew up 2 blocks away from where I'm from. So he's back with his family. Although his whole thing in detention makes no sense either. He was detained almost 9 months, and in my opinion, for no purpose. They claimed he was a flight risk, yet he'd been in the United States for over 40 years with no record. So, so that, and yeah, and then
was he also a permanent resident? Because I was reading that about the man who died or committed suicide.
No, this individual was not a permanent resident. He was just there, happily living his life with his family. Everyone else in his family is a United States citizen, his wife included, but he was not. And for other reasons, he's not eligible for that at the moment. But yeah, and and they are, in Mesa Verde in particular, they are moving people around. I had another client there that unfortunately that case was not as successful even in the detention stage. But me talking to different nonprofits out there, they are just, in Mesa Verde in particular, they are just moving all the women out, sending them to different facilities, and having the men move into the other parts to spread everyone out so they can quote unquote abide by the government regulations. And in reality, that's still not going to be sufficient in us. They're still going to be held like sardines. And the unfortunate case that happened on Sunday can happen again.
Oh man, there's a lot to keep up with, especially considering like the jails and prisons as well. And I think hopefully people are understanding that detention centers are very much like jails, This is one and the same. I'm just going to post the link for my students to check that out. You said the NPP program. What was that? What does that stand for?
It's the Migrant Protection Protocol, Migrant Protocol Protection. I mix them up because everyone just calls it Trump Stay in Mexico program. But that's a program that was put in place by the Trump administration approximately last year.
Yeah.
And for about a week, we thought that the program was going to have a stay in the Ninth Circuit. So in April, that was halted and people were allowed to continue. But just for everyone's purpose, if they don't understand what the program does, essentially before Trump, if I was from any country, including Mexico, but for this purposes, it's not a Mexican national, it has to be from under their country. So I will be from Honduras. I come to the border, I either jump over and I'm apprehended and I seek asylum, or I go to the port of entry and I seek asylum as well. Normally what happens, you have multiple stages of review. The initial officer will review your case there to see if you have, at least because he's not supposed to make the full determination. So he has to make sure that he believes your story. He thinks there might be something there. He just literally, she has to be able to let you through to the next stage. And then you would continue your process here in the United States, either in detention, they parole you in. Parole is just a fancy way of saying bond inside or release on your own recognizance, or they detain you. Okay. But you'd be here in the United States physically, right? And this program, what ends up happening in several of my clients, they come in, they have a legitimate asylum case, okay? They passed their reasonable, credible fear interview, and now they're actually in formal removal proceedings. What happens after that stage? They grab them and send them right back to Mexico and give them a document to appear back to the United States on their court date. So they're using this third country as a quasi-detention, and I've had to argue detention with that in front of a judge. Simply saying they told my client, well, are you free? You're free to roam around in Mexico, right? She's like, no. So, well, why not? She's like, well, I'm not a Mexican national. I have no idea where I am. I had to seal it. And with the NPP program, it's much different than a regular court hearing because I'm surrounded by U.S. Customs and Border Protection individuals, surrounded by ICE inside the courtroom. That makes it a little more intimidating for individuals. I simply told the judge, I go, she's not detained. Please tell her to walk up right now and go to the restroom on her own.
Oh my God.
And the officer was like, no, she can't do that. So The detention is clear. It's a constructive detention they created along the border. And they've only made border towns that are already rather dangerous. And I don't want to make Tijuana seem like a really dangerous place, because I frequent there when I'm able to, right? But the reality is, in most border towns, due to various human trafficking, drug-related offenses, and other things like that, it creates a rather dangerous place, especially for a vulnerable person who has no idea where they're from. Although they are Latino Americanos, sometimes they don't even speak Spanish fully. They speak some other kind of dialect. They speak Mom. They speak some kind of different dialect that they have no idea.
Yeah, I've had a friend who was singled out for being Honduran, and unfortunately, like, was attacked. So it's like there is anti-immigrant sentiment there, unfortunately. And I think one of my students is actually researching on that, just kind of what the dangers are with MPP, and like waiting your turn for asylum, waiting in line, in another line. So so I kind of diverted from the questions because I was interested in talking to you too. So,
Okay.
and also I just want to take a second too to thank you so much for your time. Like, I know that you could be billing us potentially up the wazoo, and he's doing this for free. So I appreciate it so much.
I'm happy to be here.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We do these things out of love, right? So thank you. Okay. So speaking of love, we got a lot of good questions from the students. And like I said, a lot of them or a few of them have to do with your inspirations. So maybe, do you want to like touch on that, and what kind of made you think about getting into immigration law in the first place?
Yeah. Well, I'm the son of two immigrants, so to me it came naturally. My mom's from San Luis Potosí, and my dad's from Sinaloa. So my parents themselves were. Immigration is just so random. That's why I want to make it clear. When some people believe that the law is black or white in certain cases, that's not the truth. Immigration is so great. So my parents were the perfect example, right? My parents struggled, sacrificed, went through all sorts of arriba Sinaloa, yes. All sorts of things just to come to the United States, right? My mom's story herself is very scary, really. And my father, gleefully now tells me that there was this one time in the 70s for like 3 consecutive years in a row that for some reason immigration would find him, send him back to Sinaloa, and then he'd end up in the same place in Chula Vista a week later. That's why. So when I moved to San Diego, he's like, "Oh, I know Main Street." I was like, "When have you been to San Diego?" He's like, "Oh, mijo, like 30 years ago." I was like, "What?" So, anyways, that's a story now that we can joke about. But on the reality of the matter is, if my parents and I was born later, or they came over much later, I would be dealing with much different laws, because my parents and my oldest brother, they're all Mexican nationals to begin with. And because they were here in the late 80s and they happened to be agricultural workers, they were part of the program, the Special Agricultural Worker Program, right? They had been working in the United States 90 days during the fields. They were physically present in the United States. They were able to get their temporary residency, then their permanent green card, and then they all became citizens in the mid 90s. Now, if they weren't here by happenstance during that time, and if they didn't happen to be agriculture workers, and then that wouldn't be the case. And my family and my older brother would still be subject to removal, as a lot of individuals are. So that's the thing about immigration. It's not judged. It's very judgy. It's very random how someone can receive a benefit. So I feel the pain for my brothers and sisters and family members nowadays that have to go through this, because honestly, if I was born now, I would be in the same situation. We'd be a mixed status family. Who knows how my parents could adjust their status? Would they have to wait till I was old enough? Were they eligible for a waiver that they needed for their unlawful entries? I don't know. So being the son of immigrants, it made it natural to want to pursue this kind of stuff, because I was the young kid, although I'm the middle of 5 children. I was the one that would go to my parents, to the doctors. I remember helping my mom read through a contract when they bought their first house. I remember having to do all these things that they wouldn't be able to do. Also growing up in the Central Valley, right, a huge influence in our family was Cesar Chavez. I grew up in Shafter, California, like I said, and that's only 15, 20 minutes or so from Delano, where the original 40 acres is from. So ingrained fighting for individuals who maybe don't have a voice happened to me at a very young age. I was taken to fundraisers Folgers. I remember boycotting lettuce and certain kinds of wine, even though I didn't drink when I was 10. So like, these kinds of advocacy was ingrained in me through my parents, right? And my father would tell me times when he couldn't go to the restroom or take a break, when they had to bring their own water, working in 110-degree weather. When my mom wasn't provided gloves when she was working the factories there of carrots or roses or garlic, because you know, so that was kind of always part of me. So when I went to law school, it was natural. It's what I wanted to do, and because I believe out of all of them, it's one of the most personal laws you can be a part of, right? Someone, you can ask any immigration practitioner, they do it for because there's something in their heart to do it. We don't do it because we believe we're going to own some fancy house and a mansion sometime sooner in the future, right? Because honestly, it's not the most lucrative field there is. We do it because we care, and we do it because we see this population getting taken advantage of. And a little story about that too. I mean, there's just not that many of us that look like me that are attorneys, to be real.
Right.
I remember the first time I went, and I was already an attorney, you know, fresh, you know, green behind the ears, but I was an attorney. And I went to my first hearing, the judge himself, me being the only brown person there other than the people, the respondents, which for people who don't know, those are the people who are detained or, you know, the defendants in any other proceeding, but in immigration, they're called the respondents. Yeah. And the judge says they didn't know who I was, so he naturally thought that I was the translator and said he would wait for the attorney to get present to get started. I had to explain to him that I was the attorney there, and he took a double take, and he said, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "I'm pretty sure I know where I am." So I had to. I purposely grew out the beard you see now and comb my hair the way you see now to make myself look slightly older. I am older. I just look younger, but I had to, you know, doll myself up in a certain way, so to speak, so I could be taken seriously. And still now that happens sometimes, although, yeah, I've been practicing, you know, 6-7 years going on it. So
yeah, I mean, it's part of the culture, right? I'm sure even in the hallways and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, the worst is when I dealt with the Mexican dignitaries when I worked for the ACLU, because a big part of that class action was sending people down and getting the word out if anyone had been a victim. So I deal with alcaldes and different governors of different states, and they'd just be like, "You're too young to be doing this. Who are you?" Like, but yet I'm the lead attorney on this massive class action. But okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's like you can't prove yourself. You know, the more you prove yourself, the more people doubt you. It's weird how that works, especially in these fields when you're like kind of breaking through these barriers. You know, I have the same experiences with teaching, believe me.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, and being a woman, honestly, like there's another level of trust that's not met for people. But yeah, so that's interesting that you're kind of breaking through these barriers, being Mexican and getting into law. And I imagine that's the culture of law school as well. Like, was that also your experience?
So that's a good question, because I mean, jokingly, me and my buddy now, Miguel, who now works for the public defender, my partner at the time, she was like, you know, like a supportive partner would be like, "Hey, congratulations on your first day of law school." She's like, "Hey, I have a friend I went to high school with," and I was like, "Oh, really?" And so at the same time, I believe she was sending him a text, who was sending me a text, and they were describing. She was describing him to me, and she's like, "Oh, I mean, brown with a beard," and I was like, "Okay, that could be anybody." But the reality was, it wasn't. We both stood up in class and we found each other right away. We were one of 4 Latinos in there. Maybe there was a couple of people from other ethnicities, but the mass reality was that the minorities were a real minority in that one section, that 110 section person. Maybe there was 15 of us or something like that, or less, much less actually, probably like 9. But yeah, the reality is in law school, there isn't many of us, and in the legal field is even less. Okay, and especially if you're a woman of color, is even less, right? Because so many barriers are put before all of us to even get to where we are. So it is difficult, but there are supportive organizations at every law school. I felt very comfortable going to California Western School of Law.
Oh, that's where you went. Cool. That's
yeah,
here, right?
Yeah, it's right here on Cedar in downtown. So, and you know, the organization La Raza Law Students, they brought me in, made me feel at home, right? And law school doesn't have to be the crazy thing that you see on TV. Sometimes it is, don't get me wrong. There, my first year, 90% of the people were extremely helpful. We helped each other, shared notes, we got ideas. That's how it should be, because when you start practicing, that's how it is. If I have a question, the law will humble you. So don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, I do immigration law, but I'm not a criminal law expert. So I will reach out to my friends that work for the DA. I'll reach out to my friends who are criminal practitioners. And that's how it is. It should be collaborative if you really want to be great at your field. But some people, especially in the first years of law school, because they want to get, you know, the top 15% or whatever it is, literally will hide books on assignments, will rip out pages in certain documents. You can't get that. So that the competitiveness is real in there, right? But I want everyone to understand that that doesn't have to be the case, and that not necessarily the norm. Those are extremes.
And there are resources like I'm kind of really pushing that for my students a lot lately. Just, you know, look, you know, for the resources and the people that want to help you, because there are people who want to help you.
Yes, that's a big point, because my first year I was being a stubborn, proud dude that I am, and I was like, I don't need anyone's help. So my first semester I didn't do as well as I should have. And you know, the epitome of crazy is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So I tweaked it. I started listening to my peers, my 3Ls, which is the third year of law school. Everyone's a L, 1L, 2L, 3L. I started talking to them. They had outlines, they had guides, they had things, you know. And you don't use those tools on your own, because I felt like, oh, you're cheating if you're using someone else's information. No, this is something that's been handed down year after year after year through this specific class, and you modify it for yourself, because that's the same practice that you'll do when you practice take the bar exam, right? You get off models, you do outlines. But long story short, to your point, is there are people that will support you. There are people that are there to help you. You just have to literally, like I said earlier, the law will humble you, and that's one of the first lessons that I learned is to stop, don't be too proud, ask for help, and my grades soared after that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to know that like you have the capability, because like, yeah, you have to believe in yourself and you know, to just even get in that space and to like believe that you can do it. I was reading some statistics saying that there's like 4% of Latinas in this country have a master's degree. And, you know, that doesn't seem like a high number, but I was still pretty proud, because it is trending upward, you know, that we're seeking these advanced degrees and like starting to see ourselves in these like professional fields. So that's awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to these students' questions, and let me pick one here. So I do have a couple questions about which cases are the most common. Yeah, what types of cases do you usually defend? Yeah, are they asylum seeking cases, or yeah?
Yeah, so big picture, I practice removal defense and all family-based petitions as well, including U visas, T visas, VAWA, and there's a lot of acronyms in immigration. So if you don't know one, it's okay. Feel free to ask me a question. I can explain those. But immigration is like this, as my professor used to call it, is an alphabet soup of acronyms, right? But generally speaking, if I'm in the removal proceedings nowadays, there's two major ones, right? The first one is cancellation of removal. For someone to be able to be eligible for that, there's three basic minimums that have to apply, right? And then there's an actual higher discretion bar. Now, the discretionary bars are so high that, again, you could have a very clean case and the judge can just deny it for a reason. Then we'll have to win it on appeal or decide to do that. But cancellation and removal, three things have to apply, right? An individual has to be in the United States 10 years continuously and physically, right? There's two different things, physically and continuously, because you could be technically, quote unquote, physically in the United States for 10 years, but you have a gap where you left for like a week or two in Mexico. Or the other part is like, right, the other part would be that they gave you a voluntary departure, and that cuts off your time, right? So that cuts off your continuous presence, but you can come back and be physically present in the United States. But I need physically and continuous presence from the day you are apprehended, and it counts backwards, right? So 10 years. You need to have good moral character for immigration purposes. That means you don't have certain crimes involving moral turpitude. You don't have an aggravated felony and other crimes that would preclude you from establishing this benefit or relief. And then you'd have to have a family member that's a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident that will suffer exceptional and extremely unusual hardship. That is a standard. Is an extremely high standard. Exceptional and extremely unusual hardship. And this has to be to a spouse, a parent, or a child. The hardship that they would suffer without you here in the United States. It cannot be your brother, cannot be your sister, cannot be your niece or nephew, even though in mixed status families, a lot of the times, because our parents work so much, that the brother becomes the dad or the most important person in a child's life, right? I know that myself when I had to take care of my little sister when everyone else was working for years there at the time. But that's it. And the bar is very high. So what you would do is you apply inside a court. We have multiple hearings to establish a relief, and then we fight. We fight to see if this person is eligible in the eyes of the judge to remain in the United States. If we are able to successfully win that case, that will lead to a permanent residency, right? And then one day that person can be a citizen. But it's a hard-fought battle to even get apprehended. To fight that apprehension out of detention, and then to fight the continuous removal case. The other one that is a big major one is asylum, right? So asylum is an interesting and extremely powerful tool because a lot of the other rules don't apply, right? Because if you're seeking asylum, it can generally wipe off any previous immigration history, almost any previous criminal history that you have if you successfully get it. There are certain criminal bars that will prevent you from seeking asylum, right? But there's 3 levels within the same asylum application, right? There's asylum, there's withholding against removal or deferral of removal as it's called. And then there's the United Nations Convention Against Torture, Article 3. All 3 can be applied to at the same time. It's just different standards at every angle, but asylum and withholding, the standard is very similar. And the process is very same. The lowest one, we'll just go in reverse. The Convention Against Torture is just that the government cannot return someone to their country of origin if they know that they will suffer or will be tortured at the hands of the government or a government acquiesce, right? If the government turns a blind eye, it's essentially the same thing as them, invoking the harm on the person themselves.
And you have to provide specific evidence, right? You can't just blanket statements say this country does this. Yeah.
Right. That's a good point because general fear is not enough. So for someone who qualified for asylum, withholding, and even to be eligible for Convention Against Torture within the 3 bars, you have to prove past or future persecution. And there's only 5 protected grounds, only 5. Okay. Now we can modify them, but it's race, religion, nationality, your political opinion, or because you're a member of a particular social group. The first 4 are very straightforward. Your race is your race, your nationality is your nationality. Someone's political opinion is very strong, right? If they're opposed to a certain government,
right,
and their religion as well. But the one that gets modified and can be helpful too is the part of particular social group, right? Before a certain case last year, women who could not escape domestic abuse was a particular social group. But that in itself was basically thrown out because of Sessions when he was the Attorney General last year. That's talking about 8 or 10 years of law in the books, and he overturned it. And that's a whole nother story, how much power the Attorney General has in immigration, because unfortunately, immigration courts are not Article 2 courts. And just to be real simple, Article 2 courts are any other court, civil court or your criminal court, where the judges have independent judgment. Here, the judges do have somewhat independent judgment, but there's a case law that made it very clear last year that Jeff Sessions essentially told the judges that you don't have any authority that I do not give you. He himself can see and review any case that he wants, and now it's bar, but the same thing applies. They can review any case they want and come out with their own decision as well. So the only way that's overturned if it goes to a higher level, and that hasn't happened yet. So so asylum is the majority, and cancellation removal, this is just removal defense cases.
Yeah.
But we have to have evidence. Like I tell my clients, very simple. If I say the car is blue, I have to provide extensive evidence the car is blue, right? I have to have photos, articles, the proof of the deed that I purchased it, etc. So if someone's telling me that they're suffering harm in El Salvador, the hands of Mara Salvatrucha, what happened to you, what's going on, I need specific details. And so for asylum seekers, it's extra interesting because there's multiple levels, right? Like I said, so now I can explain the levels. The first is the initial entry, whether you're when you're apprehended inside the border or at the port of entry. That's two crazy difference, and it is so different when it has to do with detention.
Mm-hmm.
If you present yourself at the port of entry, it's INA code 212A7 little I, which is I'm an arriving alien, quote unquote. You're present here. And it's important. Arriving aliens is a term of art, really. That's not what the whole code says, but it's a term of art. Now, if I'm found inside the United States, now we're talking 212A6I situation, and there's a huge difference. Why? The A6 and the A7 distinction will let you know if you're eligible for bond or not.
Mm.
So I'm talking about even if I'm 1 foot inside the United States when I'm apprehended, now I'm in the A6 category. I was found present without any documents inside the United States. I'm not an arriving alien, therefore I'm eligible for a bond. So individuals who are not eligible for a bond, they're present themselves at the port of entry or some other way, and they're considered arriving aliens. And arriving aliens are not initially eligible for bond. So that's one thing. Right. Then the officer screens them, the initial one, to see if they're eligible for the benefit they're seeking. If so, like I said, let's just take the general statement if they're allowed in. Let's not talk about the NPC program right now.
Yeah.
They're allowed in. Now let's just say they're held in detention. And now, depending on the officer, depending on what stage I take the case on, I can take it from the very initial. So for someone to even go to the full removal proceedings, to go to the full hearing in front of a judge, they have to pass what's called credible or reasonable fear interview. This interview is an intensive and long interview that's bigger than the initial one, and it's in front of, over the phone normally, in front of asylum officer. Here in this case, it's from Southern California generally. It'll come from now Tustin, California, where the asylum office moved in LA. It can be from San Francisco or Washington, D.C. My most recent one was from D.C. So what ends up happening here, the officer will ask about a host of 90 to 100 questions to establish that the individual will suffer a reasonable or credible fear of past or future persecution based on those 5 protected grounds that I stated. Now, they're not supposed to be the judge and jury at that moment, but I found more recently that they're being way more stringent on even that initial stage than before. Because the problem is if the ICE officer rules that the individual will not suffer persecution, or they can't tie the harm to their government, right? Because when you claim fear, it can't be, I'm like, for my example, my family, my dad's from Sinaloa. If I had family be like, oh, I can't live in Sinaloa because of the cartels. There's crime everywhere, it's drug ridden, but that's not enough. It has to be a specific harm, right? Generalized fear is not enough for you to claim asylum.
Right.
So there's a relocation aspect of it. So let's just say I am suffering harm there in my country. Just back to my situation, if they told my father, well, can you live in the Yucatan and be safe? Can you live in Baja California Sur and be safe? If the answer is yes, then there's no nexus. There's no connection to the harm you're suffering to your government. Because when you're claiming asylum, you are claiming asylum from every corner of that country. So if there's some nook in the corner where you can be safe, out of harm's way, then that's it, right? So relocation is a big issue, and the nexus is a big issue, tying the harm to the government, right? So there's 2 parts: tying the harm to the government, and then the relocation within the same country. And that's where they get most individuals, because you can imagine if someone asks you if you're part of a particular social group, and I'm telling you in a language you understand. Now that's the first time you've ever heard that translated through a third-party translator to you. Most people don't even understand that technical term. The problem is I am allowed to be in those interviews on the phone with the client. It's a 2 or 3 hour interview, and normally I will go see them at the detention facility, prepare them the best I can before this interview, right? Or I could be with them at the facility, but I'll still be on the phone, or I could be on the phone and it'll be a 4-way call with me, the asylum officer, my client, and an interpreter, where everything's recorded. But at the end of the day, I have a question. How long does asylum usually last? Once you're granted asylum, within a year, you can apply to be a resident. And then after that, you can be a citizen. But as I said, the initial interview itself, 2 to 3 hours. The thing it's not an advocacy type of proceeding, if you will, because it's not even a proceeding. It's more like an interview with my client, and I really can't say much. I can clarify during the interview. I can follow up if I think the translation was incorrect, because thankfully I do speak both languages very well. And then at the end, I'm allowed to say a short statement, but no more than that. It's not like I'm in front of a judge and arguing, no, that's not what they said. No, that's not the issue. She can't remember because she's extremely nervous in the setting. I can't. So if the person can't advocate themselves, they lose a case there. And then if they lose their reasonable, credible fear determination, they can ask it to be reviewed in front of a judge. But in that stage, it's almost more difficult than a regular trial, because we're going into a mini trial to ask the judge to literally say ICE was wrong in their finding that you have a fear. And the entire record, unfortunately, in those proceedings, most often than not, is the entire record that was created by ICE. When I've had to do that in front of a judge, thankfully, I have been able to be successful around that, but not without a ton of work. Because people who suffer this kind of trauma, it's normal to forget stuff. Your mind wants to block things that you don't want to remember, sounds you don't want to remember, smells you can't get out of your head sometimes, but you don't want to talk about them. So, I mean,
it's traumatic, yeah.
Extremely traumatic. I mean, a perfect example is I had a client who, I remember this to this day. It was like, was it November? Yeah, like November 1st, 2016 or something like that. I visit him in detention. He was just apprehended maybe a couple weeks before. I go, look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get a reasonable, credible fear interview. They're going to give you a phone call, okay? More than anything, please, when you get that phone call, say, I want my attorney present. Call him to set up a date. You have to say that. And he's like, okay, I got it. Because tactically speaking, we want to do an interview on our terms. We want it at our time, at a time that's comfortable for the client, when we have plenty of time to prepare for the interview, right? We don't want to do it randomly, because they will drag people 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning. Here's the interview. They don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay. So he was so traumatized that the very next day he received that phone call, like I said. And this very second question that they asked him after his full name, they asked if he wanted his attorney present. He said no. And he went on to fail the interview, right? And I went to ask him, why he said that, he's like, I don't know, I got so nervous. And this man had just suffered weeks of torture and abuse because he was kidnapped and ransomed right here at the border. No more than 10 minutes away here. Okay. Literally, you could see through his eyes. He was so shell-shocked, he had no idea what was going on. Thankfully, we were able to fight the case in front of the judge a month later or so, and at least give him the opportunity to pursue his full case. But that's an outlier, because those are very difficult, because more judges, more often than not, will just be, that was a determination by ICE, and they will just accept it. And there's no real true appeal for that matter.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it makes you think of how it's all portrayed in the media, and how people, assume that, like, yeah, you're the grandiose lawyer, like, speaking on behalf of your clients, and, speaking clearly and concisely, but really it's them speaking for themselves and advocating for themselves.
At that stage, yes, absolutely. And it's frustrating because you're handcuffed. And it's not until you're in the full removal proceedings in front of the judge, and that's the technical term, the removal proceedings. It's not like a normal state, arraignment or those kinds of things that doesn't exist in immigration law. But once you're in front of the full removal proceedings, then yeah, I can bring out my entire arsenal, bring out more evidence, prepare my client for cross-examination, those kinds of things. But even getting there, it's its own monster in itself. Because it can fail at the beginning, and then the officer, and it's just, the problem with immigration, it's so discretionary. If the officer, let's say with person X, decides, I don't believe your story, I'll just return them. No recourse, no problem. He has authority to do that. If the officer, the next officer, if they make it through that guy or her, this officer doesn't believe their story and thinks they don't have a credible or reasonable fear to return to their country, they don't have to, okay? They can deny them and then boom, return them back. No recourse, nothing, even if they can be completely off base. And then at the next level, if the judge decides to agree with the previous officer, there it is. Because there's such high discretionary bars, right? There's no number, there's no calculation that can tell someone why and if they'll qualify for asylum or not. So just, I always tell my clients, it's an uphill battle, because like I said, the attorney general is basically the king judge, right? And who appoints attorney general is the president. The president appoints attorney general. The president also helps appoint the judges. And unfortunately, Most
Right.
judges, if not all of them, even here in San Diego that I can think of, they were all former ICE attorneys, all of them.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like
ICE
here in
attorneys, like attorneys within ICE?
right. That's what we call the attorneys on the quote unquote the prosecution you would call in other settings,
Oh,
but
okay.
they'd be the government's representative in the removal proceeding.
So it's all like internal. Would you
Hmm.
say that? Okay.
Yes, but it's so far. So
Yeah. That, I mean, that makes sense if you think about outside of the ICE and how it works here, you know, in civilian life, where judges have sometimes like conflicting interests with, you know, the people that they're seeing in court and all of that. So,
yeah, that would be great. That means none of the judges could take any of the cases.
oh my gosh. And so are you seeing fewer cases like obviously like move through this uphill battle?
So right now, we're like I said, a lot of cases are just they're being delayed.
Mm-hmm.
One because of the virus, the MPP program. I mean, Trump is literally throwing the kitchen sink to stop legal migration.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
Salud.
Um, yeah, so he's doing everything possible to stop legal migration to the United States because, as you said earlier, I mean, they're portrayed differently in the media, immigrants, right? And I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna sound weird, but let me explain because I wish they were criminals legally the way they're talked to in the media. And the reason I say that is that if that's the case,
Yeah.
and if it's a criminal proceeding, then they have a right to an attorney at no cost to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? That'd be great because unfortunately in immigration law they do have a right to an attorney, but the government will not provide one for them because we're talking about an administrative, a civil procedure. Um, Technically speaking, although they're detained, they're arrested, they're ripped away from their families. That
Right.
all sounds like it's so intensive as a criminal proceeding, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're not afforded all the rights. So they're treated like criminals, but not afforded all the rights in the criminal proceeding. That's a problem. Because I'm a private practitioner, like most other immigration attorneys are, unfortunately, and there's a very few nonprofits that take case. But I'd be happy to take less cases if I knew that my people were getting representation in court for free, because a lot of them can't afford it. They can't. It's because it's not cheap,
Yeah.
unfortunately, right? That's the thing that I've advocated for so long, because then they'd have a Sixth Amendment right to an attorney, right? And if they can't afford one, then the government will provide one for you. And that last part is not included to immigrants, right?
Wow.
But the media, the right wing, wants to call them criminals. Then okay, then provide them an attorney for free.
So they either find a lawyer that they might be able to afford. For example, I've helped people, you know, kind of find those folks, or they have no lawyer.
Yes.
Dang. You
They go
know,
pro se. Yeah.
yeah, this makes me think of the scene from Orange is the New Black recently, the last season. I don't know if you heard about it, but they had removal proceedings on that series. And yeah, she had to advocate for herself, and she was in the jumpsuit and the chains and everything. And so you did get to see kind of what it might look like to like not have a lawyer and have to like think up on the fly like how to speak, you know, on your own behalf. And so it's just crazy like how true that is, because it's a TV show, but that's just fascinating. I want to go back to, I had a question about once someone reaches the permanent residency stage in their case, are the requirements different depending on the age of the individual?
In what sense? I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
To become a citizen, is that what the individual's asking, or?
Let's see. I don't think, oh, she is in here. Okay, let's see.
Yes, I think some citizen. Okay, so it just depends how you acquired your permanent residency, right? Before you can be a citizen. So let's just say example A. I acquired my my residency through my my U.S. citizen spouse, and we're still together. Then after 3 years, I can apply to be a United States citizen. I just file the application, make sure I've paid my taxes. I don't want to get into the full public charge rule because we don't have enough time for that. Let's just say I haven't received any benefits that would make me a public charge in the eyes of immigration purposes. I don't have any crimes that would make me not eligible to apply. Also, I'm not on probation because when you're applying to be a citizen, you cannot still have a probation outstanding. So let's say all the things are nice. 3 years later, I'm still married to my partner, who's a United States citizen. Okay, I apply.
Hmm.
And then after 3 years, I'm a United States citizen. Great, it all works out. I take the application, I do my civics test, I do my written English test, which is very basic. All right. Just real quick, with a naturalization, a citizenship interview, there's 2 parts. They review the application for accuracy, make sure you've been here statutorily the time you're supposed to, and then they have a English written thing, English written and oral exam, and it's very simple. They'll give you a 5-sentence, 5-word sentence to say out loud. Columbus Day is in October. Let's just say that, and I don't want to get into the Columbus Day problems too, but that's just another thing in itself. And then the person will say it out loud. Columbus Day is in October, right? And then, great. And then the officer will recite something. We'll say, we pay our taxes in April. Write that down. The person will write that down. We pay our taxes in April. They just passed the English and the written part. They're done. And then there's 100 civic questions. There are. And the person will be asked 10. And they only have to get 6 of them right. So after those, if they pass, they get 6. And the interview went well, they're a United States citizen. I just saw something that varies by age. There are exceptions on your age. It depends how long you've been a permanent resident and how old you are, right? It's a 55-20 rule, a 60-25 rule. So someone could be exempt from the language or those questions if they're old enough and have had their lawful permanent resident card long enough. So there are exemptions for that. And it's a lot of times, I talk to the older community, they're like, oh, I didn't know I qualified, because they're afraid to take the test in English, because although they've been here long enough, they still speak their native language better, and that's fine. They feel more comfortable in that.
Hmm.
But there are exceptions. So if you know anyone who's had their lawful permanent residence long enough and they're older, over 50, they should probably get it reviewed to see if they qualify for citizenship, especially more than ever, we need people to vote. And then the other, just generally speaking, same scenario, but I got my residency through something else. Through my parents, through something else. I have to wait a full 5 years before I can apply to be a citizen. And then after that, the same scenario, I go get the interview, the civic exam, everything else, and I become a United States citizen. But there is a 2-year difference. If I got to a spouse and I'm still married and everything's still good, in 3 years, right? There's also an exception with VAWA and other individuals that are in the 3-year bracket. But generally speaking, most people fall into the 5-year bracket. To receive the citizenship after they've been lawful permanent residents.
After they've been lawful permanent residents. Okay. Yeah, I think this particular student is researching kids in detention too, and how their process might look different. And we've heard like horror stories of them not being able to have representation and.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's terrible stories. There's that story that came out last year. Was it a little boy or a little girl in Texas in front of the judge, a 3-year-old or something, trying to defend themselves. It's insane.
Yeah.
And the thing is, on the books, the juvenile should be protected in a different way. There's TVPRA juvenile. That's like someone who came in under the age. Usually they're afforded different avenues. They have a different docket. There's like a juvenile docket that's stamped on their notice to appear. Usually, if it's a juvenile, USCIS has jurisdiction to apply that, to advocate or to file that asylum application first before an immigration judge can. So there's all this other stuff that's supposed to be, long story short, to protect the juvenile, but that's not happening nowadays. I mean, the Flores Agreement is being violated, where children can only be held for a certain amount of time, and we all know that that's not the case.
Right.
So it's kind of the current administration is doing almost whatever they want to make it difficult, almost in some cases impossible for someone to fight their case.
Yeah, I think that's the goal. That's what the intention is. And it frustrates me so much when people say, I don't see many changes that Trump has been making with immigration, or like, how much of a wall has he actually built? And it's like, it's different walls. It's walls in the court system. And actually, I have gone to Arizona and there are new walls. And, it's like these things do have real impacts on people's lives.
It's insanity. Like I told you, when you asked me what was the first thing that's most daunting or frustrating, it is the government. Because I am one of the rare fields that whatever comes out of the president's mouth will affect me on a day-to-day basis in court. Like one quick example is like after he was even inaugurated, from January to February, the same ICE attorneys, right, the same prosecutors that I had a good relationship that I'd fostered over years, where a lot of the stuff that was minor we can agree to before. We can agree to a certain bond amount. We can agree to release this person. We can agree to close this case because it doesn't merit the time of the government's resources.
Mhm.
In February, I made the same argument over something seemingly a week before that was granted without question. All the and I remember to this day, all the ICE attorney could say in front of the judge was like, "I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to agree to that anymore." That's all he kept repeating in my 15, 20-minute argument. The judge kept looking to what say the government. I'm not allowed to agree to that anymore. And I was looking at him. I was like, "Alan, what's going on?" He's like, "I'm sorry, Gabe." And I was like, all right. Well, luckily, it was early on in the administration where judges still felt they had the authority to do something. And I was able to successfully terminate that case, and that person is now a resident. But would I be as successful nowadays? I don't know, actually. And that's the real problem. Something that seemingly a week before that was no question
Mhm.
and became difficult. Now I'm even questioning myself if that's even possible to do in court. So
Which is it's hard on you mentally, and I want to recognize that it's, that the mental health of immigration lawyers is very important, because you're just being thrown left and right all the time and constantly doubting yourself and having imposter syndrome, and just you have a lot, like, it's a high risk career. So I hope you're taking care of yourself too.
no, and that's an important thing because thankfully I'm able to compartmentalize and break things down. So
Yeah.
it affects me, but on the way I have other colleagues, and you're right. In any profession, that in any state, your mental health is so important. So please do whatever you have to do to take care of it. Go on walks, go to the movies, see a therapist, whatever it has to do. I have colleagues that have to go see a therapist once or twice a week because we hear some of the most traumatic things you can think of, especially when we're dealing with asylum clients, especially when we're dealing with a partner or a woman who's been a victim of abuse for decades on whole, right? You hear some awful stories, and that's why I tell my clients now, I'm like, I don't want you to be embarrassed. Don't be shy. Just please tell me every single detail, as terrible as it sounds, because I want to be able to help you to my fullest, right? So there is some trauma that we take in secondhand on top of the frustration of having to deal with the unknowns of the United States government.
Yeah. Well, I just want to keep you for 5 more minutes to ask one more question. This one's from Cielo, and it does kind of incorporate other folks' questions, and we've hit most of them. So she says, what's one of the hardest cases you had to work, and what made that case hard? And I know all of your cases are hard. So maybe a particular instance, if you can recall.
Well, there's been a few. The massive class action was difficult given the hours and finding out and hearing the different types of abuse. The coercion that the government was using to force people to sign a document on their language. I know that they would take their baby right out of their hand and tell them, sign this document or I will remove your baby instead.
Right.
2-month-olds taken out of a mother or father's arms. You can imagine that they would do anything on earth to make sure that child's protected. But it's interesting that what they say is true. When you want to think about where you are, you always go back to the beginning. And something that gets to me always is one of the first cases I ever took on here in downtown. Even fresh out of the bar exam, even just waiting for my results, I was lucky enough to find a gig right away. And I worked for this woman I worked for, who will not be named, was a quintessential lawyer you see on TV. I was literally just out of law school, had just finished the bar, and she would just throw cases on my desk and say, figure it out. That's all she would say.
Oh my gosh.
No guidance, nothing, figure it out. That's it. I'm like, all right. But thankfully on this scenario, she explained to me what was going to happen. This was a scenario where a woman was, and I subconsciously bring her up every once in a while here and there, she was a victim of abuse for over 25 years, right? And I'm talking about intense abuse, right? And I remember to this day, this woman coming into the office, and I was told to take her declaration in detail. And I don't know why I said it this day, and I still say it to this day. I told the woman that what you're going to tell me is going to be very difficult. And I know there's very, very traumatic things that happen to you, but I need you to tell me every detail. So we never have to talk about this again. Is that okay? And she's like, yeah. So she proceeded to tell me 25 years of abuse, sexual assault, and no other word to say than torture by this man that she was married to. Repeatedly, he would beat her, assault her when he felt like it, break bottles over her head, cut her. I'm talking about decades of abuse. When he found out she was pregnant, She thought he was so jealous. He thought it was for someone else. He beat the crap out of her so much. She went to the hospital. Then the guy's whole family almost assaulted her in the hospital for even bringing that up, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
During her pregnancy, that man, and I will say this in the easiest way I can, did everything possible for that child not to be born, right? Anything you can think of, he abused that woman in that way, made her bleed in places you shouldn't bleed. But the child was born. Now, besides hearing that extremely difficult case, the thing about it is that it dawned on me that the timeline she was describing, her daughter was right there next to her, and she was around that same age. Then her daughter starts crying out of nowhere. Then the mother starts crying, and the daughter starts realizing what I realized, that she is the product of that abuse, and she had never heard that story before. So now you have the mom and the daughter crying, explaining what happened, and that's the first time I had to do something like that to help this woman. I took a break. Even to this day, I told them I did it for them, but in reality, I did it for myself. Because you heard it was something so heavy. I literally had to walk a block around downtown. It took 10, 15 minutes to even breathe to what I heard. I can't believe another human would treat another person this way. But I went back in there, calm, right, composed, because and something I need the students to understand, that the law is not without emotion, right? That's not the truth. But the reason we remain the way it is because if I show any emotion, if I show any apprehension or I'm surprised at what I'm hearing, with my face or any body language, then the woman's going to be like, or the man, for this trauma that they suffered, they'll feel embarrassed. They'll be like, oh no, I'm getting some reaction off them. They won't feel as comfortable, right? So you have to remain calm. You have to remain steady so the person can just tell their story. Because if you're surprised for what you hear, if you're affected and it shows on your face or your body language, the client will not be comfortable. They will know that they'll feel embarrassed, even telling you stuff. They can see that it's affecting you. Now, that's not to say that I don't take it in, right? Because I held that, and I still remember this. Now we're talking about 10 full years later, right? But I still remember that story to this day, and I still remember that woman to this day. And thankfully, because the laws were what they were then, she was able to get her asylum case. She was able to win her own reign here in the United States because she could not escape that domestic partnership. I mean, the story, she would run, he would find her, he would beat her, and she had to escape with being pregnant and come to the United States along time.
And was he a citizen then?
He was a Mexican national. Actually, this abuse all happened in Mexico. And when the woman escaped pregnant with another child with her daughter already born. So so that's also another thing where people are like, you can't get asylum from Mexico. It's not true. I've won plenty of those. And unfortunately, immigration law, the more terrible the story is, the more likely we have a chance to succeed. But it shouldn't be like that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's wild. And then to witness like that generational trauma, like right in front of you unfold, it's like, your heart breaks because you're like, my people, and this is what we have gone through and have gone through for hundreds of years, and all the dots are connected. And it's almost like, I mean, I feel this way too, like the more you know, the more you're just like, you just crumble a little bit each day and you have to build yourself back up,
Yeah.
One of my students is talking about mothers who migrate with their young children, and that's one of the reasons why is to escape domestic abuse. And she did ask this tiny last question before you leave. Do you offer clients psychological help?
So what I do, if I see a client is suffering some kind of psychological trauma, I have to refer them to someone, right? And a lot of cases, a psychological evaluation will help bolster the case. A lot of the times, I have a U visa client for a woman who suffered a tremendous trauma. And for those who don't know, U visa is just an individual who's been a victim of a crime, substantial physical or mental abuse, a result of a crime. So it's 18 qualifying crimes that can, and that's the second most powerful tool in immigration, in my opinion. But and they could be eligible. That means they were either helpful in the investigation, prosecution, or sentencing of the individual. They can be helpful in any 3 stages of the case. And if they cooperated with local law enforcement, they can get a certification from the police department. And then once you get that certification, we can do what I'm doing now for this woman. We're going to apply for the big U visa. And the U visa can include a waiver that will literally wipe her entire immigration history away. What was the question again? I got sidetracked.
Offering a psychological help.
So in the U visa, say, please get a psychological evaluation to prove the trauma that you suffered.
Yeah.
Because some cases, some people don't come forward till way later, right? For either some kind of shame that they suffered because their family didn't believe them or something like that. I had a UV's case with a woman who suffered sexual abuse when she was a child, right? And didn't feel like she could report it to anyone. But later, we were able to go to the DA, do some other work, and she reported it. But then, yes, she had to go get a psychological evaluation because she was living for that for such a long time. But again, you have to know in the law, like I said from the beginning, it humbles you. You often days you feel like you don't know anything, right? I walk around being Socrates. The only thing I don't know is that I don't know anything. But be smart about it and just hand out your resources, right? And that comes in everything. If I don't know psychology, I'm not a doctor of that case, but I have someone that I trust that I can refer clients to. And there's no reciprocation. I don't know what, I do my best to keep away. I don't know what anyone charges. I don't do any of that. I'm like, here's a number of a few people, go see them. Please get psychological evaluation, especially if I need it in the case, because it can help.
Right. It's part of the process. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out again of your day. And honestly, this is such a treat for them because, like you said, it is pretty rare to see Latinos kind of become lawyers and defend their people in these kind of like ways that, like you said, are, you know, they're just changing all the time and really affected by our governments. And they know that they're affected by the governments, but when you like learn about it in these tangible ways, it becomes like very real. So I just think it's so like amazing that we got this opportunity. And when we can meet in groups, I want to buy you a drink or a horchata. I owe you one, so please reach out if you need anything.
That sounds good. Thank you for having me. And please feel free to share my contact information with your students. You never know if they have any questions or themselves need help, because some people don't share their entire status with the whole group, right? Some people could be dealing with stuff nowadays that we don't even know of, mixed status families, right? And there's resources out there to help individuals during this terrible time as well. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to ask my students to stay behind real quick, but feel free to head out. It was so nice to meet you.
Nice talking to you all. Take care, stay healthy.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So I wanted to remind you all to leave your name in the chat box for attendance. If you didn't get your name in for attendance, please put your name in the chat box. And if you have any questions about the reflection, I can answer those for 5 minutes. And then I had 2 announcements earlier in the class. One was that there is an info session for undocumented students if you need any resources. And then the other one is that we have a MECHA meeting today at 4 if you're interested in getting involved in a club. So if you're interested in those things, send me a chat box or send me a message in the chat box and I'll get you like the links to those. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about the reflection? If you don't, feel free to head out, but I wanted to hang back for a few minutes in case you do. I learned so much. Oh my gosh, that was really fun. I hope you guys learned a lot too.
I joined a little bit late. Which reflection, what's the reflection?
So instead of the final project, we're doing a reflection on the research project. And I want to say I already uploaded it, but let me double check, make sure I published it. But basically, it's a prompt to just kind of share out what you've learned through the research project. And then there also is a there also is a reading response, our last one, which will be about kind of our guest speakers and some feedback from you guys. So let me just check though, Natalia, thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions while I look to see if I published the reflection? Oh yeah, so Natalia, it's under the modules and then it's at the top, it says PBL reflection. Just click on that and that'll tell you what's expected of you. for this. That's the last assignment for our class.
So basically all our research is going to go into that reflection and that's what's going to be due?
Yes, read the prompt. You don't have to put all of your research, but just kind of what you've learned, and if you can answer your question, and just, yeah.
Okay.
All right, and then Giomi said, how do we resubmit the PBL master document back to you? Okay, good question. There is an option to resubmit the assignment, but if you can't figure that out, just email it to me. But I do want to see the revision of your PBL master document to give you the rest of your points. And when is it? When the reflection is due, the PBL reflection is due on the 29th, so next Friday. And we're going to have class next week on Wednesday and talk about just your projects and kind of close out. That'll be our last meeting is next Wednesday.
For the reflection, do you want us to answer all of the questions you provided or just one?
Don't think of it as like separate questions, just kind of look at them and think about how you might like reflect. But yeah, it's not required that you answer all of the questions.
Okay.
It's just a way to think about like how to share your research.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The point is to like not do too much and stress yourself out about the final. But also you put a lot of work into your research, so I do want to see if, you know, what it was like for you. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, so if you see the module for this week, there's two things in it, the PBL reflection and the journal response. So I'm gonna post the journal response today. And it's just gonna be a really simple kind of question about the guest speakers, and that'll be it. Okay, I'll hang out for another couple minutes. Yeah, no problem. You guys have a good day. Thank you for joining us. Bye, Kimberly.